He's a lifelong learner.
Yeah, at least that probably helps later the foundation. I certainly don't sound bad. Yeah, it's great. Surprises. I remember like when I first took top one, I kept the class 3/4 of the and we were like in a year and meeting together. So our meeting was always so
students, there are some chairs here, 3 chairs here. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our event. As the Director of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education, my name is Dr. Ph.D, and I teach in religious studies, and I also direct the center. So I wanted to welcome you tonight. Thank you for coming. This is a very special Kristallnacht. It is the 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht. And we are here today for many reasons, but every year we do commemorate Kristallnacht as a Dr. Frederick Schweitzer lecture. So before I even got here, it was named after Fred, my dear friend, my mentor and my colleague. And what Fred did was he founded the center, for those of you who don't know, with Brother Drake in 1996. And we were fortunate to have a wonderful 25th anniversary and celebrate Fred and his achievements as the founder. We thank Dr. Schweitzer and the past administration, as well as the new administration, for continuing the memory of the Holocaust and supporting a center such as this on our Catholic campus. Let me just share some brief words about Dr. Schweitzer, who is my dear friend, and I consider him as an uncle on the dinner table today. He is not only erudite, wise, and active at his young age, but he is one of the kindest people I know. A romantic at heart, and a fierce thinker who transformed the way that Christians, and especially Catholics, viewed the Holocaust, especially Jews relying on Vatican II. For Dr. Schweitzer, it was an unexpected turn, which I can relate to, my own work, that led him to his brilliant historical analysis and biographical work on the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. We are so grateful to him for his support and his mentorship. His work is more important than ever. Because I was looking through all of his work, and he, in 2008, co-edited a book with Marvy Perry. This is about 20 years ago, to write about a current revival of anti-Semitism in Europe and the demonization of Jews in parts of the Muslim world. He gave special importance to the exposure of the myths and lies that for centuries led people to regard Jews as a dangerous other, and that led to violence and persecution. In his work, Dr. Schweitzer analyzed the meaning of the principal myths that have made anti-Semitism such a lethal force in history. Jews as deicides, ritual murderers, agents of Satan, international conspirators, and conniving, unscrupulous Shylocks. He was an expert and was already discussing historical documents illustrating the recent revival of classical myths about Jews among Black nationalists, Holocaust deniers, and Islamic fundamentalists. Thank you so much, Fred. Let's give him a hand. If you can you please turn off your cell phone? I really appreciate that.
Not bad for 93.
So tonight we have a special program at 7 o'clock with Dr. John K. Roth, who will Zoom in. John is a friend of mine for some time now, and he was unable to travel because of his health. He was one of the first Christian scholars to do work on the Holocaust. But before, I would like us to deeply engage and understand what it is that we are experiencing today in the world as we see the vilification of Jews and other faiths in the United States. I want to explain that I'm an academic of Islam and the Holocaust, a person who does not look for condemnations about the other, but someone who wants to think through how we should think about this moment, keeping all sides as our community. Think through these problems together and not to polarize. To answer questions that our student community might have about the history, the religion, the Renaissance, the conflict, the amazing work that Jews and Muslims have indeed done together. Classrooms are not about propaganda for me, hate or demagoguery, but there are places for students from all backgrounds to apply the complexity of each situation and trauma facing all of us, whether it is war, hate, genocide, or even victimization. Our students come here to be in a classroom, and our campus is peaceful, and I thank them because they know that the classroom is a place for academic inquiry. Our students are able to dialogue, engage, and in turn their anger into something more constructive, which is why we are here as faculty on campus, that holds peace and respect for all human beings. I believe that on this campus, we have kept peaceful and we have engaged with the Muslim Students Association, the Jewish Student Union, our Jewish colleagues and our Muslim colleagues, because we want constructive conversation. Academia is a place of protest, yes, but it is a place not of hate protest. Academia is about liberal arts, the humanity of all people, no matter what. Don't we forget that one of our first universities in this nation were theological schools, directing us in places of science, engineering, and other fields. I would like us to, and I'm doing this because our students are here and it's important to me, is to see something that's really important that's going on in case you don't know. And it's a short video about the reports of anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim hate crimes.
The Israel-Hamas war continues to escalate. Top U.S.
All right. Of course, it'll be too loud.
Agencies are sounding the alarm about hate here at home.
As the FBI has noted, we are seeing an increase in reported threats against faith communities, particularly Jewish, Muslim, and Arab communities and institutions.
A new report from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security detailing that recent events have sharpened the focus of potential attacks on targeted individuals and institutions perceived as symbolic or tied to the conflict. Cities across the country now stepping up security efforts in the wake of these threats. California Governor Gavin Newsom authorizing $10 million in funding for increased police presence at places of worship, including synagogues and mosques. With daily demonstrations flooding the streets of New York, the NYPD deploying all officers in full uniform until further notice. Despite an increase in law enforcement, the fear of these threats becoming reality. In New York City, police releasing these photos of a man who they say punched a woman in the face at a subway station, allegedly telling her it was, quote, because she was Jewish. And in Cincinnati, the Jewish Community Relations Council says at least 10 anti-Semitic incidents were reported at schools in the city in just 1 week, including bullying of Jewish students and harassment.
Since the massacre of Israeli civilians and others on October 7th, we've seen a 51% increase in anti-Semitic incidents around the country in comparison to the same time frame the previous year. It just shows that what happens in the Middle East manifests itself here in the United States and frankly around the world.
Free Palestine!
Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, a man has been arrested after police say he approached a group of pro-Palestinian demonstrators, yelled racial slurs, and pointed a gun at them. And in San Diego, police are investigating a possible hate crime at the Islamic Center after flyers and blue cloth were displayed near the mosque.
We as, Muslim Americans, we have the right, like every other people who belong to any faith congregation, we have the right to come and pray safely.
Anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim hate speech have also been on the rise online. According to the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, the social media platform 4chan, an unregulated messaging forum often used by hate groups and white supremacists, saw a 479% increase in the use of explicit anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim slurs since the war began.
When you see spikes in violent, hateful rhetoric in any of the online platforms, but especially those fringe platforms that extremists often operate in, it's a huge red flag.
The rise in verbal and physical threats coming after a 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy was stabbed to death in Illinois. Prosecutors say his landlord targeted him for being Muslim.
You want war? It's overseas. It's not our war. It's not the United States war. We're gathering here to say we need to save our kids. I'm not just saying about Palestinians. I'm saying about our own kids.
A devastated community torn apart by another hate-fueled attack.
Stephen Romo joins us now from New York. Stephen, you mentioned in your report there this new report from the FBI. Does that report list any specific threats?
Yeah, Ellison, that's the thing about this report. It doesn't mention any specific plots or anything like that. The warnings are much more general because the climate is so heated and there are many potential targets that are seen as connected to the conflict, whether they actually are or not. Things like mosques and synagogues. Interestingly, the report says the biggest threats come from lone actors, the so-called lone wolves that we talk about, who may be inspired by this conflict. Ellison?
Okay, so I wanted us to see that because I want us to understand why we're here tonight and why it's so important that we're doing this. And as we commemorate Kristallnacht tonight, I shared some thoughts about what some believe was a turning point that led to the annihilation of 6 million Jews and 6 million others. 267 synagogues burned, 7,500 Jewish businesses closed and vandalized, cemeteries were desecrated, 91 Jews murdered, and 30,000 arrested. Jewish children barred from schools. Discrimination against Jews was permissible, and the state sanctioned it, which led to the deportation of millions to be murdered. And because people in Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland were convinced that Jews were to blame, which, as you know, spread throughout Eastern and Western Europe, and then even North Africa. So I'm not going to tell you what Kristallnacht was, but I know some students might not know, and I'm just going to play a very short clip of what November, and this is, as you know, the 85th, this is about the 80th, but it's the shortest thing I could find to show everybody, because I don't want to just play videos, but I want us to be educated of what our current condition could lead to, and that we all have a responsibility to stop hate.
November 9th and 10th, 1938, coordinated attacks against Jews occurred throughout Nazi Germany and its annexed territories. Thousands were arrested, Jewish homes and shops were destroyed, and synagogues were burned down. The violence came to be known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, due to the shards of glass that covered the streets from broken shop windows. When Chancellor Adolf Hitler started employing extreme anti-Semitic rhetoric in Germany in the 1930s, he was building upon centuries of anti-Jewish sentiment. The first forms of such prejudice date back to ancient times and have been present in many countries since then. After Hitler blamed Jews for the economic and social damage incurred during World War I, Germany adopted anti-Jewish legislation and started viewing Jews as a group that could not assimilate into European society. Jews were gradually segregated from the rest of the population, and their businesses were boycotted. On November 7, 1938, a young Polish Jew named Herschel Grinspan walked into the German embassy in Paris. In revenge for his family and the thousands of other Jews who had been expelled from Germany, he shot a Nazi diplomatic officer, Ernst von Rath. 2 days later, after von Rath died of his wounds, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels delivered a fiery speech using the killing as pretext for retaliation. On November 9, 1938, Nazi paramilitary forces and civilians began demolishing Jewish homes and other buildings throughout Germany and the annexed parts of Austria and Czechoslovakia. Over the course of 48 hours, 267 synagogues were destroyed and more than 7,000 shops were damaged. The German authorities looked on without intervening. More than 90 Jews were killed in the rampage, and 30,000 Jewish males were detained, per instructions to arrest as many young and healthy men as local prisons could hold. They were later deported to concentration camps. Immediately after Kristallnacht, Jews were blamed for the riots and were fined 1 billion Reichsmark, or about $400 million. The government also confiscated all insurance payouts for properties damaged during the violence. Today, Kristallnacht is considered to mark the beginning of the Holocaust, in which Nazi Germany and its collaborators murdered some 6 million Jews.
Okay, thank you for that. I would like to call up the candle lighters, if it's possible, over here. All the kind of volunteers. It's updating, so, okay, whatever. I think you have to. Huh? It is updated. Okay, so tonight we commemorate Kristallnacht, which was directed against Jews, but I will mention some of the other groups who were also killed. But before that, I would like to take a moment to pray for the victims, the 400 victims in Israel, 240 hostages, and the thousands of innocent civilians that have been killed and have suffered in Gaza. May we see some solution and not senseless violence. I also pray for the 1,000 Catholics that live in Gaza at the Holy Family Parish. If I can call you up one by one. over 6 million Jews. For the Slavs. Roma and Sinti. Homosexuals. Mentally ill or physically disabled. Soviet prisoners of war. Roman Catholics. Protestants. Jehovah's Witnesses. Freemasons. Black European Jews and non-Jews. Dissenters. Israeli victims. Palestinian victims. Thank you to all of the students. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to try and get this Zoom going so we can get to John Roth. It's early.
Recording in progress.
Grace, do you have John?
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Can the Zoom people hear me? Just say yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. John, we couldn't Zoom you in for the ceremony because we don't have a second camera. So there's a lot of people here that you can't see.
See you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you completely okay, and I'm going to try and put you on spotlight. So, I wanted to introduce my dear friend, John Roth, who is the Edward J. Sexton Professor Emeritus of Philosophy and the founding director of the Center of the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights, now the McRublian Center for Human Rights at Claremont McKenna College in California. Roth has published hundreds of articles and reviews and co-authored, or edited more than 50 books, including The Failure of Ethics, Confronting the Holocaust, Genocide, and Other Mass Atrocities, Sources of Holocaust Insight, Learning and Teaching About the Genocide, and his latest book, Warnings, The Holocaust, Ukraine, and Endangered American Democracy, which focuses on the 2024 elections in the United States. Named the 1988 U.S. National Professor of the Year by the Council of Advancement and Supportive Education, the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. Roth has also received the Holocaust Educational Foundation's Distinguished Achievement Award for Holocaust Studies and Research. I welcome you, John, but I also want to say a few words about you personally. I met John Roth in Aspen, Colorado, for the first time. We were at a conference, which is called Interfaith Fund for Understanding, run by Carolyn Manusevich, who passed away recently. And I remember John gave a lecture. I knew all about him because I was a fan of his. And he gave a lecture, and then I had to give a lecture right after him, so can you imagine how nervous I was? And I gave a lecture after him, and he came up to me and he said, wow, this work is so needed. And it highlighted my life for a whole year. That's a first encounter. And John and I have worked together in interfaith ways, but he's also written amazing books about encountering the other. He's been so prolific, such a champion of making us understand what the Holocaust is about, how to educate our students, and always been a great teacher. So thank you, John, for joining us. I welcome you. I wish I could give you a hug, but I can't. So please, it's your stage.
Thank you. I am deeply grateful to Professor Manaz Afridi, my longtime special friend, for the invitation and honor of speaking to an audience at Manhattan College on this 2023 observance of Kristallnacht. When and where the first Kristallnacht observance took place, I can't say. But I do know that such commemorations have happened in many places every November during the more than 50 years that I have studied, taught, and written about the Holocaust. Every time, however, the context differs. On November 9th, 2016, for example, Donald Trump became President-elect of the United States. On November 9th, 2020, Donald Trump claimed that voter fraud delegitimized the presidential election and stole his second term. Next year's commemoration of Kristallnacht will take place days after the most important election in my lifetime and perhaps 10 years. On November 5th, 2024, Election Day, next year, democracy itself will be on the ballot. This year, as we observe Kristallnacht on an American campus at the Manhattan College Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center, or between Hamas and Israel, is a post-Holocaust setting unlike any that have existed before. By now, the basic outline of that catastrophe is well known. On October 7th, Hamas atrociously killed more than 1,400 Israelis, many of them civilians and children, took 240 hostages and rained rockets on the countryside. That day was the deadliest for Jews since the Holocaust. Israel's response has besieged Gaza, determined to destroy Hamas, but also killing many Palestinian civilians, including children. The suffering of the Palestinian people, who are not synonymous with Hamas, is undeniable. What the future holds for Israelis and Palestinians is, to say the least, uncertain, as the observance of Kristallnacht comes and goes in 2023. I am an American, a Christian, and a Holocaust scholar who has spent many years on college and university campuses. As I come to this 2023 observance with those identities in mind, I think of Kristallnacht and its context, not only Palestinian, Israeli, but also American, in terms of warnings. I will illustrate how that works by referring to 9 common but decisive realities: a statement, an election, a photograph, a fact, an hour, a wall, a rock, a hurricane, and a color. Start with a statement. On October 14th, I received the following statement from respected Holocaust scholars who sent it to an international group of colleagues. It says, "We, the undersigned, condemn Hamas for its heinous crimes against humanity. These terrorists who slaughtered hundreds of civilians, men, women, children, babies, and seniors in the most horrific manner and kidnapped scores of others must be brought to justice. Israel has every right to defend itself and to pursue these murderers wherever they can be found. In this time of pain and devastation, we call on Israel to do 3 things. First, do everything in its power to rescue the hostages. Israel holds vast numbers of Palestinians in prisons, many of them elderly. Israel must seek an exchange of prisoners in order to save its own and other countries' captive citizens from certain death. Second, refrain from punishing collectively Gazan civilians for the crimes of Hamas. One massacre does not justify another. This will only lead to more devastation, fueling the cycle of violence. We call for an immediate ceasefire and de-escalation. Third, end the violent oppression of the Palestinian people. Apartheid, the West Bank's decades-long occupation, keeping Gaza's 2 million Palestinians under siege for 16 years, erasing the memory of the Nakba, now all contribute to the brutalization and violence. They must be urgently brought to an end. There is no other way out. We must refrain, this statement continued, from using our grief and shock to justify revenge and create more civilian bloodshed. We call upon the Israeli leadership, Palestinian leaders, the United States government, the international community, and all peace-seeking people around the world to work together for a swift end of the current violence and toward a true and just peace between Israelis and Palestinians. I join more than 1,000 signers of this statement. I did so because I believe its warning There is no other way out. If anything approaching normal life for Palestinians and Israelis is to be possible, people of goodwill have to work together to move toward a true and just peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and also among us in the United States. In all of those cases, the health of democracy is crucial. Now think of an election. Tuesday, November 7th is what we Americans sometimes call an off-year election day. But important votes were cast, including those for seats on local school boards. Some of those candidates want to censor the teaching of history, ban books they find objectionable, and privilege Christian nationalism in our public schools. 85 years ago, on April 10th, 1938, Germans, including citizens in recently seized Austria, went to the polls. Scarcely fair and free, that election for members of the Reichstag, the German parliament, was the last during Nazi rule. The ballot contained one issue. Did voters approve a list of Nazi candidates for the Reichstag, as well as the annexation of Austria? Yes or no? Nazi officials determined that the voter turnout was 99.6% of those eligible to vote, with 99.1% of them voting yes. Adolf Hitler despised democracy, taking it to be a deceitful, subversive outlook spread by Jews. 5 years earlier, on July 4th, 1933, he celebrated the law against the founding of new parties, which established the Nazi Party as the only political party in Germany. By then, the civil liberties of German Jews, including the right to vote, were on their way to extinction, destroyed by the Nazis' racial anti-Semitism. When democracy dies, the costs are too much to bear. Authorized, incited, and coordinated by Nazi leaders after a minor German official died following an assassination attempt by a young Jew named Herschel Grinsbaum, the scarcely spontaneous government-sponsored eruption of nationwide pogroms around and during November 9 and 10, 1938, 7 months after Nazi Germany's last Reichstag election, targeted Jewish communities throughout Germany and Austria, confirmed that violence against Jews would be inflicted with impunity, and ensured that normal Jewish life in the Third Reich was impossible. Next, consider a photograph. Despite common usage, especially in the United States, the term Kristallnacht, meaning crystal night or the night of broken glass, inaccurately names the devastation that took place. The wreckage of Jewish businesses and homes did include countless smashed windows, but the onslaught was much more shattering than that. Many ordinary Germans, their religious heritage and identity overwhelmingly Christian, unleashed massive carnage. While their friends and neighbors watched, their watching was enabling, the perpetrators looted Jewish homes and wrecked Jewish businesses, torched more than 900 synagogues, while intentionally inactive police squads and fire brigades stood by, desecrated Jewish cemeteries, injured or killed hundreds of Jews, and terrorized virtually every Jew in the Third Reich. Some 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps at Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen. In the aftermath, the Reich government fined the German Jewish community an amount equivalent to $400 million to cover the Kristallnacht damages. In addition, a wave of lawmaking deprived Jews of property and their chances to earn a living. A photograph taken in Roth, Austria on the night of November 9 and 10, 1938 provides a glimpse of what happened. It shows local residents watching and thus enabling the burning of the ceremonial hall at the Jewish cemetery in that city. Their backs to the camera, the onlookers, men, women, and children gazed at the consuming fire. The photograph is silent. The scene was not. The onlookers, not to mention the perpetrators, had much to talk about, but apparently little to say that protested or intervened against the destruction. The photographer saw what happened. Roth's photo contains no evidence of firefighting or firefighter. Apparently, the ceremonial hall in that Jewish cemetery in Roth was allowed to burn. Nor does the picture identify the onlookers or the perpetrators. It tells nothing about what they were doing before they arrived at the scene or what they did after they left it. Although active at the site, the photographer also remains anonymous. The picture says nothing about other photographs he or she went on to take. Nevertheless, despite its anonymity, this photo is part of what the historian Karl Schluess aptly called the twisted road to Auschwitz. It has duplicates in the many other atrocities that have scarred the earth before, during, and after Kristallnacht and the Holocaust. The silence that permits and inflames them harbors a cacophony of deceit, disrespect, duplicity, death. Now think about a fact. Kristallnacht happened. That's a fact. It is also true that what took place led to events far worse. Kristallnacht was the prelude to genocide. The best way we can study that history includes taking it as a warning about ourselves, one that we ignore at our peril. Kristallnacht is a warning. That has been said before, but now Kristallnacht's warnings resound with urgency. They do so because that catastrophe and the genocide that followed it did not erupt by chance, nor was the Holocaust fated to happen. Human decisions and policies in the 1930s led to disaster. Destructive versions of them are widespread in the 2020s. Hitler's rise to power in 1933 doomed the post-World War I parliamentary democracy of Germany's Weimar Republic. The Holocaust historian Christopher Browning is right. America is not Weimar, he says. Trump is not Hitler. Republicans are not Nazis. But, he aptly underscores, Weimar's fate provides us with some instructive parallels and important warning signals. The warning signals are Kristallnacht and Holocaust related. Hitler's rise to power, the Nazis' devastation of democracy, the torched synagogues, the destruction of Jewish homes and businesses, and the brutal imprisonment of thousands of Jews culminated in in the mass shootings and gas chamber murder aimed at the destruction of European Jews. Kristallnacht warns against autocracy and obedience to it. It cries out, beware of big, repeated lies, conspiracy theories, disrespect for evidence and truth, disdain for democracy, disregard for language that defames and thus inflames division and violence. If such alarms are ignored, the world is worse for it. Absent lies and liars, especially big lies and liars with autocratic power, Kristallnacht and the Holocaust would not have happened. Nor could autocratic Nazi power, which undermined and destroyed German democracy in the 1930s, advance without the compliance and complicity it needed and received from enabling leaders in every sector of German life. Education, law, politics, science, medicine, business, sports, the arts, religion. The Nazis' lethally racist anti-Semitism rested on falsehoods. Nazi power arose because Hitler and his followers bogusly and repeatedly insisted that Germany's defeat in World War I resulted from a stab in the back conspiracy that never happened. Nazi propaganda overrode contrary evidence, calling it fake news. And Hitler's vows to destroy the Jews were slandered as a disease-spreading toxic pestilence in the body politic show how malignant language becomes deadly. The key point for us Americans is not that failure to heed Kristallnacht's warnings destines some version of that genocidal history to be ours, but that failure to heed them endangers everything that we hold dear when we are at our best. Next, an hour. On the evening of Thursday, October 21st, 2001, MSNBC's now retired Brian Williams interviewed the novelist and political activist Don Winslow. If you could picture the face of a clock, said Williams to Winslow, and if midnight is the end of our democracy, what time is it right now? Winslow responded, 11. Williams's nightly newscast was called the 11th hour. If we are warned in time by Kristallnacht, then what should that mean when our democracy is threatened by forces akin to those that ignited Kristallnacht, leaving destruction and death in their wake? My response to that question is another. Have you read a small but powerful book called On Tyranny by the Yale University historian Timothy Snyder? If not, one way to take seriously the warnings of Kristallnacht after Election Day 2023 and during the war between Hamas and Israel, one way to strengthen our needed habits of democracy in November 2023 and beyond is to read Snyder's book and take it to heart. Snyder, who teaches the Holocaust, Ukraine, and how recent democracies have failed, says that Americans today are no wiser than the Europeans who saw democracy deal with fascism, Nazism, or communism in the 20th century. Our one advantage, he says, is that we might learn from their experience, and now is a good time to do so. Following his own lead, Snyder subtitled his book, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. Note 3 of those lessons. First, Snyder urges, be as courageous as you can. None of us can do everything needed to protect and preserve democracy and to move toward true and just peace. But we should not overlook the fact that even small deeds and modest actions are significant. Each and every one of us can do something to protect democracy and create justice. Our presence at this Kristallnacht observance bears witness to that. So do the votes that many of us cast earlier this week. Second, Timothy Snyder urges, be a patriot. Set a good example of what America means for the generations to come. Being a patriot, he underscores, is not the same thing as being a nationalist. A nationalist might say, Deutschland, über alles, or my country, right or wrong. By contrast, says Snyder, a patriot wants the nation to live up to its ideals, which means asking us to be our best selves. Our best selves, I would add, do not stand by in silence amid the violence of white supremacy and misogyny, insurrection, and the tyranny it encourages. Our best selves do not take rights away, especially not from women and girls. They defend and expand rights. Our best selves protest against and resist forces of the kind that produced Kristallnacht in 1938 and war between Hamas and Israel in 2023. Third, Snyder urges, believe in truth. To abandon facts, he says, is to abandon freedom. If nothing is true, then no one can criticize power because there is no basis upon which to do so. Snyder shows how truth dies. Hostility to verifiable reality lets inventions, lies become facts. Then blunt and senseless and endless repetition of those inventions and lies makes, says, the fictional plausible and the criminal desirable. Snyder's warning is that post-truth is pre-fascism. He continues, and I quote for a few moments here. Fascists despise the small truths of daily existence, loved slogans that resonated like a new religion, and preferred creating myths to history or journalism. They used new media, which at the time was radio, created a drumbeat of propaganda that aroused feelings before people had time to ascertain facts. And now, as then, many people fused faith in a hugely flawed leader with truth about the world we all share. Kristallnacht happened not only because the Nazis abandoned truth, but also because so many other people aided and enabled them by their silence. Doing what's needed in our 11th hour, which now includes the upheaval in the Middle East, requires breaking silence, affirming facts against fantasies, and defending truth against lies, big and small. And now we come to a wall. Somewhere, the following words were found on a wall. I believe in the sun even when it's not shining. I believe in love even when I feel it not. I believe in God even when He is silent. No one knows who wrote those words. No one is certain about the precise location of the wall where they were found. But stories from the Holocaust suggest that those words came from a Jew, child, man, who put them on a hiding place wall in Cologne, Germany. Other versions of the story put the words on the wall of a ghetto, concentration camp, or killing center. Wherever the wall's Holocaust location may have been, its Jewish inscription expressed resistance against Nazi tyranny. Outlasting their author's living, the words still inspire defiance against powers that rob people of hope and joy. What do we Americans believe in when democracy may die in darkness? What do we believe in when we don't feel that democracy at its best has much of a future? What do we believe in when justice seems abandoned, violence endless, when the noise of lies and liars quashes evidence and silences truth? We can and must do more than write on walls. We have to heed Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, who broke American walls of racism and wrote, "Where you see wrong or inequality or injustice, speak out. Because this is your country. This is your democracy. Make it, protect it, pass it on." That's vital work that complements the resistance written decades ago on a Holocaust wall after Kristallnacht. Hard as a rock, it's unending work that must be done, lest injustice, despair, carnage, and death win victories they do not deserve. And now Iraq. In August 1942, the French novelist and philosopher Albert Camus arrived in the high plateau region of Les Chambon, a French village in Vichy, the unoccupied region south of the Loire River, where the Germans permitted a puppet government under France's World War I hero, André Philippe Pétain. Camus hoped the mountaineer would bring relief from his tuberculosis. By the time he left that area in late 1943, Germans had occupied Vichy to shore up defenses against Allied gains across the Mediterranean and North Africa. The German occupation meant that few French havens were left to choose France. But Les Chambon and its surroundings remained one of them. The coalition of resisting helpers kept several thousand Jews out of harm's way. Camus knew about the rescue activities while he was writing The Plague, his important metaphorical novel of resistance. Set in the Algerian city of Oran in the 1940s, Camus' novel chronicled the battle that Dr. Bernard Rieu fought against the lethal outbreak of bubonic plague. Its death toll included Rieu's friend, Jean Carew, who lived his conviction that on this earth there are pestilences and there are victims, and it's up to us, so far as possible, not to join forces with the pestilences. Like his friend, Dr. Rieu did all he could to fight the plague. Its siege eventually lifted, but not forever. The plague bacillus never dies or disappears for good, the doctor remembers at the novel's end. The fight against it, he concludes, must be never ending. That outlook led Camus to contemplate the fate of Sisyphus, the mythical Greek king who loved life and defied fate by impeding death itself. The gods condemned the resisting Sisyphus to a ceaseless repetition that required him to push a weighty rock up a mountain, only to have it roll back to the bottom as he neared the top. In the myth of Sisyphus, the moon depicted Sisyphus in ways that fit defending, improving, and expanding American democracy and the international quest for justice and peace after Kristallnacht and after October 7th, 2023 as well. At the very end of his long effort, wrote Kemper, Sisyphus watches stone rush down, whence he will have to push it up again toward the summit. It goes back down to the plain. It is during that return, that pause, said Camus, that Sisyphus interests me. If the descent, wrote Camus, is sometimes performed in sorrow, it can also take place in joy. This word is not too much, said Camus. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a person's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Discouragement and despair are real. The successes of anti-democratic authoritarianism, curses of seemingly endless violence, intensify those disheartenings. The failures of resistance against tyranny, incessant lying, relentless corruption make joy scarce and happiness hard to sustain. While denying none of that, the Camus account of Sisyphus insists that as long as life allows, one can resist autocracy and scorn surrender to injustice. More than that, the struggle for truth, for democracy, and human rights can produce, at least at times, a defiant, in spite of, joy. A happiness sustained by solidarity with those who do what is right and good, in spite of the fact that such work has no end and may sometimes seem to be a forlorn cause. And now let's enter a hurricane. A Jewish philosopher named Philip Halley admired Camus. Halley also killed Germans as an artilleryman in Europe during World War II. He knew that the barrages he unleashed were insufficient to stop the Holocaust, but they were necessary to end that plague. Later, Halley wrote about cruelty and also about the life-saving work at Les Chambons. The preciousness of human life, the unending threats to it, and the complex necessity of uphill and unceasing resistance, those themes appeared repeatedly in his writing. Halley's wall might have been inscribed with his motto, which was lucidity and passion. He called himself a skeptic. No ideas but in facts, he liked to say. No ideas but in things. His skepticism had two parts: suspicion of abstraction, closure, and finality, and a conviction that details, particularities, and facts contain moral insights and have lessons to teach if we pay attention. Halley knew a lot about ancient Greek philosophy. He reminded people that the early skeptics were doctors. They helped him to discern that lucidity means getting as clear as possible about what is happening, especially if disease is the focal point. Knowing what is going on is not enough, however, especially if disease is the focal point. Passion has to sharpen the focus. Halley's skepticism entailed that one must act, get people out of harm's way, and help them. The bedrock of his ethics, he said, was that it is better to help than to hurt. That the vital center of ethics is deep down recognition of the connection between the preciousness of my life and the preciousness of other lives. And that ethics, he said, at least at its heartfelt best, is about spreading the joys of living. Hallie was a brilliant philosophical storyteller. One of his favorite stories centered on a hurricane. The storm reached his Connecticut home, where he experienced its havoc, but havoc was not all that Hallie saw. Even while the storm raged, he thought that space or calm, quiet, existed within the hurricane's eye. The eye of the hurricane, he observed, is in the very middle of destructive power, and that power is always near. Yet, within the eye, Hallie added, the sky is blue. Drawn to the blue sky overhead, Hallie had noticed birds that appeared to be gliding happily high up in the eye of the hurricane. But later, a knowledgeable friend told him that the birds were actually in trouble, fighting to stay aloft in powerful downdrafts, trapped in the eye. They were reeling from having slammed into the wall of wind surrounding them. Despite the plight of the struggling birds, Hallie's hurricane experience contained moral insight. It's the hurricane we're in, said Hallie. Don't forget it. But he did not see that condition as one that should harbor resignation, indifference, and hopelessness. Ways can be found to expand blue. Ways must be found, he insisted, to make a larger space of blue, for peace, for love. Doing that work, Hallie emphasized, takes power as well as love. It takes force of will. It takes assertion and commitment. And last, color. Blue was Philip Hallie's favorite color. It's a prominent, quintessential American color too. Lucidity and passion about that fact are connected to the Great Seal of the United States. Americans do not often think about that emblem, but it appears on official documents and proclamations. We carry it on our passports and $1 bills. On July 4th, 1776, immediately after the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, it established a committee, including Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson, to create an official seal to affix on documents and to certify the new nation's independence. Not until July 20th, 1782, however, was the design approved. One of its features is the still aspirational motto, E pluribus unum, out of many one, which underscores the importance of unity in spite of ongoing contentious division. The seal includes the colors of the American flag, red, white, and blue. Charles Thompson, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, longtime Secretary of the Continental Congress, and co-designer of the Great Seal, explained their meanings. White, he said, symbolizes purity and innocence. In spite of the fact that the United States never attains those virtues. They remain significant because they challenge us to do what's right. Red, said Thompson, represents hardiness and valor. Their place in American history encourages us never to give up doing our best. Blue, said Thompson, stands for vigilance, perseverance, and justice. That combination makes blue especially important in the 2020s and beyond. Vigilance tracks danger. Perseverance resists when danger threatens the most. Both are much needed to protect and expand justice, which is democracy's lifeblood. Expand the blue. Enlarge and fortify vigilance, perseverance, and justice. Finding and sustaining the force of will, assertion, and commitment to do that never-ending work is how we need to respond to Kristallnacht's warnings for us Americans in the 11th hour of November 9th, 2023 and beyond. Thanks to those of you who are hearing me at Manhattan College. I have been speaking to you far away on the West Coast in Washington State, but it has been an honor and a privilege to be able to share my thoughts about Kristallnacht 2023 with you. Thank you.
I don't think you heard that, John, but there was an applause for you. And so we're going to open it up for questions, both for people online and also for people in the room. So if we can have a student, maybe a lot of students have already kind of gone, but if there is a student left that has a question, it would be lovely to hear from you. Okay, no student questions. So, Arlene Chasik, would you like to ask a question?
Go ahead. I was very interested to hear your discussion and your references to Camus and the rolling the rock up Sisyphus, the myth of Sisyphus. And I feel that we're in that situation now. And I can't help feeling despair at rolling it up and having it come down, and each time it comes down it hurts. And it hurts for all of us. And I know I'm putting a big burden on you, but if you could just give me some message of how I can persevere and have some sense of optimism that your words and the words of, and the message of Kristallnacht will reign in this country and open students and parents and teachers to just do open discussion and to air one another's opinions in a peaceful, loving, caring way.
Thank you. It's your question contains a mood and feeling that I share. And I think I would start to respond to it by hearkening back to the rescue efforts that Albert Camus witnessed while he was writing his novel, The Plague. Here were people in Nazi-occupied France who probably felt lots of despair and feelings of uncertainty and even fear, and yet they found it within themselves, partly because they did it as a community, to work to rescue Jews. And I think that whenever we feel like, we're ready to throw in the towel or give up, the history of Kristallnacht gives us also some examples as we get further into the aftermath of Kristallnacht of people who found ways to act out of hope and to give hope to others, and they did it by being in solidarity with one another. So my basic response here is to say that the observance of Kristallnacht that we have experienced together, all across the country, as it turns out, brings together a small group, but still a significant group of people who care about human rights, care about peace and love, and care about justice and truth. And we need to build off of each other. Understand that here, you and I, clear across the country, are talking to one another. And we care about the same things, I think. And the fact that you have those feelings gives me courage and encouragement. And I'm hoping that perhaps some of the things that I have said may do that for others. We can't give up. I think this is the message that was built into that statement that I signed in the aftermath of the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th. I think it's present in Camus' writings. I think it's present in Philip Halley's experience of the king and his notion of expanding the blue. It's contained in the words that were written by who knows who on that wall somewhere in Germany. And it's contained in the writings of Timothy Snyder in his book about tyranny. So there are people in the world who, in spite of it all, keep working. They keep rolling their own version of the rock up the hill, and even though they know it may come down again, they refuse to give up.
Can we speak?
Yeah.
Easy.
I think that Manhattan College is fortunate to have Dr. Afridi, who continues to roll that rock up the hill. I read her posts, I read what she says, and she is a ray of hope and love at Manhattan College, and I certainly appreciate her having this lecture tonight. Thank you.
Well, Professor Afridi is a beacon of light. Not only at Manhattan College, but throughout the world. Her testimony, her example, she is the kind of person who can and does give all of us hope who care about what is right and good.
Indeed.
Okay, in the audience here, are there any questions in the audience? Aaron?
Yeah, I agree with Roth.
Can you possibly take this first? Can you do your job?
You had mentioned a couple of times the import of different types of media and kind of fueling the inertia of some of the forces that lead to Kristallnacht events. I wonder in our current moment where we have social media and kind of a decentralized media structure that's giving us all this information about especially particular crises globally. I think this is a very vague question, but I just wanted to ask your opinion about kind of social media and its relationship to continuing these kinds of crises and like discrimination patterns, whatever.
John, did you hear that?
Maybe you can help me just a little bit, Manaz, if you would.
Yeah, I think that what she's asking is, to our student Maren, and she's asking whether social media kind of augments these crises in terms of things that are going on, say, Israel and Gaza, but also these crises like Kristallnacht, the beginning of the Holocaust. How do you see social media playing a role?
Yes. Well, there are two ways that come to mind. One is the negative side, that part of the rock that we have to keep pushing up the hill and it rolls back down, is that the media are sources of disinformation and conspiracy theories and falsehoods of all kinds that complicate things and lead to violence and sustain it. So that's the bad news. The good news is that the same media can be used for defending what is right and good, for creating versions of community, virtual communities sometimes, that express concern and care and keep our eyes and ears focused in good directions. You mentioned when you introduced me tonight that I recently, with my friend Leonard Roth, published a book. It's called Warnings. It was kind of the basis for some of my remarks tonight. And as a result of writing that book, my co-author Lenny and I have been on a number of podcasts and talk shows with people who are interested in what we have to say and ask us questions about it and help to amplify the concerns that we have, some of which I expressed tonight in the talk. So there's lots of opportunity there for sharing insights and knowledge and facts and truth, and those have to be taken advantage of. I want to mention just one thing that happened on a talk show I was on with a woman who has a program on a public radio station in California. Jill Cody is her name, and she mentioned that she always likes to end her interviews by asking people 3 questions. And I think her questions are excellent, and I want to share them with you because it fits with the theme that I was articulating in the talk. That is, none of us can do everything that's needed to set things right, but all of us can do something. So Jill Cody likes to ask her people who appear on her program these questions. What should we keep doing? What should we stop doing? And what should we start doing? And those questions are important because they're good discussion questions. And they are questions that all of us can answer in a way that can contribute to the presence of love and peace and justice in the world.
Questions from the audience or from, yeah, Fred. Chris is coming with the mic.
Hello, John. You and I know each other from the annual Scholars Conference on the Holocaust of the Churches. And on one of those, this would be 1995, 96 or so, and I had a panel presided over, I think, if I remember right, Harry James Cargis. And in the course of it, your principal theme was the difficulty, the immense difficulty and complication of opposing evil in the form of Nazism. And the example was a Polish man who became a policeman, a Jewish policeman, who he thought he was going to escape and save his family, but he presided over the roundup and evacuation to the death camps of his family and friends and his whole community. In my own career, combating anti-Semitism, when I got started in the 1960s, I thought I could cure this disease. I've had to learn that it's a recurring disease like the plague that you referred to. And the only way you use the metaphor of the stone rolling it up and it falls down, and you have to plunge down and start, as it were, all over again. So I think in combating anti-Semitism, it's the eternal task, and I use the formula of containment. You get an outbreak and you respond to it and you contain it, but you don't deal it a death blow. You don't annihilate it. You just stand by and wait for the next one. So I invite your comments, and I must say personally, I'm awfully glad to see you and still in harness.
Did you hear all
Thank you
that?
for.
John?
Yes, I followed it pretty well, and the comments and question provoke some thoughts in response. I agree with you. During my long career as a Holocaust scholar and educator, I often felt like, wow, if we could just teach people about Holocaust, do it successfully, that will be a big step on the way toward curbing, if not eliminating, anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, that hope, that assumption even, was too optimistic and even naive in some ways. And it ties into our observance annually of Kristallnacht. I think the reason that we observe Kristallnacht every year has been partly just to remember what happened in early November of 1938, and how it was the precursor to things that happened afterwards that became even more lethal. But I think the notion has been that by remembering and commemorating and observing, the effect will be that something is taken away and something is embedded in our thinking that will help to curb, if not eliminate, the hatred, the deceptions, the untruths, the anti-Semitism that led to the Holocaust. And this is where observing Kristallnacht in 2023 is a real test. I mean, it feels like the boulder really came crashing down about a month before we were to observe Kristallnacht this year, and Hamas unleashed its attack on Israel. So I agree with you. I think that we have to keep remembering, we have to keep teaching, we have to keep attention focused on the damage that human beings can do, and the reasons for why that propensity exists in human beings, in order to do two things. One is to do as much as we can to curb those tendencies, but secondly, I would say to keep our attention focused on the need to act in the midst of these crises and catastrophes. it really is the Sisyphus motif as Camus developed it, that you can't give up, even though the cause may seem to be forlorn. And so we should keep observing Kristallnacht, no matter what the context is. And especially it's important, I think, in 2023 to observe it and commemorate it. But we can't be naive about it and think that, well, just by doing this we will, heal the wounds and correct the injustice and so on. No, it's much harder than that. But the remembrance, the act of commemorating, taking time to do that, can have an important contribution to make in the continuation of resistance against these ongoing illnesses, diseases that we have to contend with.
Okay, we have time for another question. Anyone from the audience, or I know we started a little early. Sorry about that. Anyone?
A sequel.
If anyone deserves a beauty.
John.
Hang on one second, Fred. I'm just going to give him the mic. It's Fred again.
John, here back.
Yes.
At that conference that I remember in the middle to late 90s, you said, which startled me, and I thought, no, you're wrong, because the wall had fallen, the Soviet Union collapsed, and everything looked blossoming. But you said that it was possible, or even likely, that the 21st century, which was approaching, would be as violent or more extreme in its violence than the 20th, which was closing. I invite your comment.
Well, I would say I may have been correct in making that judgment. Let me put it this way. I'm gonna speak as an American here now. I would never have imagined during the 20th century, or even in the early years of the 21st century, that our American democracy would be as endangered as it is right now. I mean, what took place on January 6th, 2021, I sat watching that on television, almost in disbelief. But it happened. So violence has many forms and shapes, but in our country, democracy has been violated. It has experienced violence against it. And at the same time that that's been going on, we find ourselves now looking at the worst warfare in Europe since World War II, and the Middle East is aflame. And none of us quite knows how this is going to be resolved. I don't know if that adds up to more violent 21st century than the 20th century, but it doesn't seem like the century is off to a great start as we are moving into to its third decade. And that worries me tremendously. Here's something that maybe others of you are feeling too. I find that the older I get, the more I care about what I think is good and right. And especially in times when it feels like those things are danger. So we have a lot of hard work to do, a lot of heavy pushing of the rock up the hill. And I just hope that we can find the strength and courage and interconnectedness to do what we need to be doing.
All right, Arlene, just one more comment and then we're going to call it a night. Or Marvin, please.
I have a question. I remember in the late 30s when the Ku Klux Klan was riding rampant and was at its peak, and when the German-American Bund were marching in New Jersey and filled the Madison Square Garden in a rally. I think that the clock was 3:30, was 11:30 then. Being at 11 o'clock now isn't so bad compared to that time. I have a second observation also, or second question. That was just my second question is, or statement. There's a direct line, the precursors of precursors. When Hitler wrote his Mein Kampf, that was a precursor. When he got elected, that was a precursor. When he forced all the Jews out of their businesses and out of their professions, that was a precursor. And Kristallnacht was almost a final precursor to the Holocaust. But there were there's a straight line that could be drawn over a period of 10 years of Hitler's consistent anti-Semitism getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And, just a comment.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think those of us who studied this and taught about it, or written about it, we realize that in the period of the precursors, there were times and places when the momentum could have been checked and stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the time you got to Kristallnacht, it was too late.
Yes.
That's one of the lessons of Kristallnacht, is you put it very well, that yes, Kristallnacht is a precursor, but it's more than that. It's both the ending and the beginning all at once of a destruction process. And so yes, it's right, and this is the part of the challenge about what the future will become. It has to do with partly a sense of timing and a sense of urgency, about doing what we can to prevent getting to the tipping point where things can't go back or can't be salvaged. And I think there are tipping points like that. We probably experienced one on October 7th. And so then, in the aftermath of October 7th, just as in the aftermath of January 6th in our country, now the question becomes, okay, what comes next? How can we respond in a way that doesn't have things spiraling out of control even more than they have already been?
Well, thank you so much, John.
I just want to end by saying I want my time with you to be something that can't just have a happy ending, but I don't want it to have a despairing ending. I believe I'm very strongly on the side of Albert Camus, that you can, as long as you have life and breath, if you choose to, you can battle against the plague. And in the process, lives can be saved, and hope can be found, and there can even be joy in the solidarity of doing that work together. And I think that's where we are, and I think that if we do our best, we are our best selves, I think there is reason to have hope for the future.
Thank you, John. And I think there's hope too. So,
Thank you so much for a very special experience for me. Thank you.
we'll be in touch. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Faithful amen.